When Melania Trump initiated a lawsuit against Jasmine Crockett, hardly anyone expected it to become a cultural flashpoint, until a single witness altered the entire course of the case in less than 10 seconds. The moment the news broke, it felt like the foundations of Washington shook. Former First Lady Melania Trump sues Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett for defamation. This wasn't gossip. It wasn't speculative chatter on cable panels. It was official. Melania's name printed boldly at the forefront of the legal complaint, a document that instantly became the center of national discussion. For most Americans, the real question was never whether the dispute would become explosive. It was only a matter of how intense, how loud, and how far-reaching the outrage would grow. Think about the scale of what was unfolding. A former First Lady, a figure often reserved, poised, and carefully distanced from active political combat, taking direct aim at a rapidly ascending Democratic Congresswoman. That alone guaranteed the kind of media frenzy usually reserved for historic scandals. Cameras camped outside the courthouse. Commentators speculated in round-the-clock cycles. News tickers ran the headline until it became impossible to ignore. But the shock wasn't rooted in policy disagreements or ideological warfare. This battle was about language, about comments Jasmine Crockett had made sharply, boldly, unapologetically, which Melania's legal team argued crossed over a definable legal threshold into personal harm. And in an era where every syllable lives forever online, where context can be clipped away and tone replayed endlessly, the stakes were amplified beyond measure. The case began on a sweltering Texas morning in a Dallas courthouse. The heat clung to the skin. Crowds gathered in restless clusters. Protesters held fluorescent signs. Trump loyalists wrapped themselves in flags. Journalists leaned over guardrails calling out for quotes from anyone remotely connected to the case. "This doesn't feel like a trial," a woman murmured to her friend. "This feels like something history will circle back to." Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Reporters, analysts, locals who simply wanted to say they were present when something significant took place. Two women stood at the center of it all. Melania, smooth, refined, deliberate; Crockett, fierce, articulate, and utterly unwilling to shrink. "Mrs. Trump versus Representative Crockett," the clerk announced. Everyone leaned forward as though the air itself had thickened. This was not simply a civil claim. It was a contest of identity, legacy, power. To understand why the case carried such weight, you need to understand Jasmine Crockett herself. She was never a politician who avoided the edges. Originally a defense attorney in Dallas, she defended those who had no one else. She took calls from frightened families at midnight, stood beside people who had been dismissed, disregarded, or ignored. She didn't fear judges, prosecutors, or headlines, recalled Andre Phillips, an activist who had worked alongside her. She believed in standing eye to eye with the world, even if the world stared back hard. That directness, honed from years in courtrooms where voices mattered, didn't soften when she entered Congress. It sharpened. Some called her refreshing, others called her reckless, but no one called her forgettable. So when she made comments about Melania and her involvement in certain dealings during the Trump era, no one who knew her was surprised. What shocked people was Melania's response. Why Jasmine? Out of all the critics, why her? A reporter voiced the question openly on national television. It was a reasonable inquiry. Crockett wasn't a senior committee chair or a longtime Washington titan. She was a rising voice, but one whose words could cut. Crockett's strength was her refusal to bow. Threats were oxygen to her resolve, which made her, in the eyes of Melania's advisors, uniquely hazardous. Melania had spent years cultivating an image rooted in control, measured speech, calculated distance, quiet elegance. Crockett, by contrast, was all unapologetic presence. This lawsuit became more than a legal proceeding. It was a symbolic collision between two Americas, one shaped by privilege, grace, and curated public image, the other forged by struggle, confrontation, and unvarnished truth-telling. When reporters pressed Crockett after the filing, she didn't retreat. Outside her Dallas office, cameras flashing, she said clearly, "If speaking the truth about how power operates lands me in a courtroom, then so be it. I do not retreat. I do not fold." The statement replayed across every broadcasting network. Depending on who you asked, it was either inspiring or incendiary. Yet one fact became undeniable. Jasmine Crockett would not be intimidated. Behind closed doors, though, the strain showed. File stacks grew. Strategy sessions ran past midnight. Even the strongest voices tremble in private. "They want to break me," she admitted quietly to an aide. "But if I bend now, I will never stand the same again." The case was personal for both women. A test of endurance, a test of identity. Meanwhile, Melania's motivations were dissected endlessly. She had built her public life on elegance, privacy, composure, surviving years of scrutiny with stillness. But according to her legal team, Crockett's remarks didn't simply touch politics. They threatened Melania's personal integrity and history itself. "This isn't about defending her husband," a political analyst explained on CBS. "This is about defending her own name." Some advisors warned Melania that suing would elevate Crockett even further. Others insisted silence would imply guilt. Ultimately, Melania decided, "I will not allow falsehoods to remain unchallenged." Her voice, according to those present, was unwavering. But once she filed the lawsuit, there was no going back. By stepping into court, she opened the door to examination, interrogation, and an unavoidable public judgment. Still, her supporters gathered behind her in Texas and Florida, holding signs reading, "Protect Melania's dignity." Conservative commentators praised her courage. Even critics admitted it was bold. Yet, as one strategist noted, the lawsuit gave Jasmine a platform. "She doesn't need to fight for airtime. The case guarantees it." Melania had faced controversy before and stayed composed, but courtrooms come with uncertainty. Once a case begins, control shifts to judges, witnesses, and journalists. And that was the true danger. By suing Crockett, Melania wasn't just protecting her image. She was risking it. In court, her attorney described Crockett's remarks as reckless and misleading. "This case isn't political," he argued. "It's about accountability and preserving the integrity of the First Lady." Melania remained mostly silent during proceedings, calm and unreadable, occasionally jotting notes to her lawyer. Observers described her demeanor as cold but composed, a sharp contrast to the energy in the room. For a while, it seemed her legal team had the upper hand. Their arguments were clear, their evidence solid, but cracks began to appear. Every defamation case depends on proof, and proof means opening doors to scrutiny. Crockett's attorneys were ready, not just to defend but to challenge. Outside the courtroom, debates raged. Some saw Melania's move as an act of pride. Others viewed it as a strategic distraction. A late-night host quipped, "When a First Lady sues a congresswoman, that's not defamation, that's primetime television." Still, beneath the jokes and speculation, something deeper unfolded. Melania, once a symbol of silence and control, was attempting to redefine herself as someone who fights back. But public symbols are fragile. When they crack, they break fast. Reporters stationed outside the Dallas courthouse knew they were witnessing a turning point. This wasn't just a legal fight. It was a clash of personalities, reputations, and America's struggle over who defines truth. For Melania, the risk was immense. For Jasmine, the opportunity was priceless. But Melania was about to discover that courtroom victories aren't won by evidence alone. They're shaped by moments, and one such moment would soon upend everything. The Earl Cable Federal Building in Dallas had seen major cases before, but never one like this. From sunrise, the courthouse buzzed with activity. Satellite trucks lined the streets. Reporters from Los Angeles to Miami crowded the steps, and college students camped out just to witness history. Inside, the air conditioning hummed against the Texas heat, but the tension made the room feel heavy. Journalists clutching paper cups of coffee whispered predictions. Everyone knew they weren't just covering a lawsuit. They were watching a battle that would echo far beyond the courtroom walls. Everyone leaned forward, waiting for the gavel to strike on the front bench. Melania Trump sat upright, her beige suit perfectly tailored, hair arranged in her signature polished wave. Every motion, from adjusting her pen to lifting a glass of water, appeared precise and practiced. Across the room, Representative Jasmine Crockett carried a different kind of presence. She leaned forward, scanning her notes, occasionally whispering to her attorney. While Melania's expression stayed unreadable, Crockett revealed flashes of irritation when a camera clicked too loudly, amusement at R-mark from her aide, and determination whenever her eyes met Melania's table. Reporters whispered, "They're not even looking at each other." Moments later, the judge, a tall man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, entered briskly. Court is now in session, he declared. Though his voice carried the weight of routine, even he seemed aware this was no ordinary hearing. As proceedings began, Melania's lead attorney, Philip Ransom, stood to address the court. His tone was smooth, almost theatrical, clearly aimed at both the jury and the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is straightforward. Representative Crockett crossed the line of free speech. She didn't critique policy or question political motives. She made personal accusations against the First Lady without evidence. Her claims were broadcast, repeated, and believed by millions. That is not politics. That is defamation. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Crockett quietly slid a note to her attorney, Linda Garvey, who smirked before tucking it into her folder. When Ransom sat, Garvey rose, her voice sharp and deliberate. Thistrial isn't about dignity. It's about silencing dissent. My client spoke about influence, transparency, and accountability, the principles we expect from leaders. Mrs. Trump may dislike what was said, but dislike isn't defamation. Truth is not defamation. Punishing a sitting member of Congress for doing her job sets a dangerous precedent. Crockett met the eyes of a juror scribbling notes as Garvey spoke. The air in the room thickened, each side crafting its words not just for 12 jurors but for millions watching online. From the back, a reporter murmured, "This might be the trial of the decade." Spectators whispered. A man in a baseball cap sang softly, "Whatever your politics." Seeing a First Lady sue a congresswoman, that's wild. During recess, Crockett stood near the defense table. "Sipping water, Congresswoman, do you regret your comments?" a reporter called. She didn't hesitate. "Regret," she said firmly. "Only that truth seems so fragile for some people." Laughter came from her supporters. Melania's team didn't smile. When court resumed, witnesses described how Crockett's remarks had echoed through the media. Melania's lawyers emphasized reputational harm. Crockett's team countered that public figures naturally face criticism. It comes with the territory. By afternoon, even the judge seemed to sense that the issue went beyond defamation. It was now a battle over free speech itself. After a tense exchange, he struck his gavel. "Control yourselves," he warned, though the energy remained charged. Cameras weren't allowed, but sketch artists captured every tense glance and expression. One drawing showed Crockett leaning forward, finger pointed as Melania stared ahead, lips pressed tight. As the day ended, the tension only deepened. Both women had drawn their battle lines, neither backing down. It was clear this would be a fight unlike anything the nation had seen. But the true turning point wasn't the opening arguments. It lay ahead in the evidence Melania's team had prepared, and the counterattack Crockett's lawyers were ready to launch. By the second morning, the courtroom rhythm was set. Reporters raced up the courthouse steps before sunrise. Security lines stretched around the block, and the gallery filled quickly with political aides, law students, and curious locals. When the judge nodded, Ransom rose again, confident, composed. His navy suit looked freshly pressed, despite the Dallas humidity. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began. "Words have consequences. This case isn't about politics. It's about reputation and truth." Representative Crockett crossed the line when she accused the First Lady of involvement in baseless matters. These weren't passing remarks. They were broadcast to millions, causing real harm. He paused, letting silence settle. "The First Lady is not here as a politician," he continued. "She is here as a woman, a wife, a mother whose name was unjustly tarnished. We ask you to hold Representative Crockett accountable." Jurors took notes. Reporters typed rapidly. Melania sat still, hands folded neatly. Occasionally she leaned toward Ransom, whispering softly. Ransom called his first witness, Simon Leary, a media analyst from Arizona who studied how stories spread online. He displayed charts showing how Crockett's comments had circulated nationwide. "These statements didn't remain in Washington," Leary said. "They became part of the national conversation, amplifying the damage to Mrs. Trump's image." Ransom asked, "Did these remarks alter public perception of the First Lady?" "Yes," Leary replied. "They portrayed her unfairly and inaccurately." Next came Dana Mercer, a public relations expert from Phoenix, who testified about how false narratives can cause lasting harm, even after being corrected. "That's the power of perception," she explained. Ransom faced the jury again. "This isn't criticism of policy. It's reckless words aimed at a person sitting right here." He gestured toward Melania, who looked at the jury calmly, her expression steady but fragile. Yet under cross-examination, cracks began to show. Garvey stood. "Mr. Leary, you said Representative Crockett's remarks spread quickly." "Correct." "Yes. Would you agree the First Lady is already one of the most scrutinized women in the world?" "Yes. And that public figures naturally face harsh criticism." "Yes. So, what you're saying isn't that she created scrutiny, but that she contributed to what already existed." Ransom objected, but the judge allowed it. Leary hesitated, then admitted, "That's one way to put it." Reporters' fingers flew over keyboards. Garvey pressed on with Mercer. "If a statement is true, is it defamation?" "No, and who decides what's true or false?" "The court does, exactly." Garvey smiled faintly and returned to her seat. The defense had begun to find its footing. Melania's strong start was beginning to weaken under careful questioning. As lunch recess began, the courthouse steps overflowed with reporters and microphones. A journalist called out, "If Melania wins, does that mean?" Other question was drowned out by the crowd's chatter, echoing the intensity building inside. Does every member of Congress have to guard their words? Or is she simply shielding herself from falsehoods? Asked the attorney. Where's the real boundary? Melania sat quietly at the plaintiff's table. Her lawyers gathered close in hushed discussion. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett shared a brief laugh with her own team, the sound echoing faintly. Two distinct atmospheres in one courtroom. One side was reserved and tense, the other alive with confidence and purpose. By the end of the day, the jurors had heard the essence of Melania's claim. Words have weight, reputations matter, and Crockett's remarks had caused measurable harm. But few anticipated how sharply the momentum would turn once Crockett's defense began. When it was their turn, Crockett's attorneys weren't just ready to counter. They were ready to redefine the entire narrative. As the defense prepared to speak, the courtroom buzzed with expectation. Reporters had already framed the case as a clash between free expression and personal reputation. Crockett sat still, arms folded, her expression calm, but her focus razor-sharp like a fighter waiting for the bell. Her lead counsel, Linda Garvey, stood with a thick binder, but didn't open it. Her first words came confidently. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and firm, "this case isn't about dignity. It's about silencing a voice that has dared to ask difficult questions and challenge influence and authority." Representative Crockett didn't fabricate stories. She spoke what millions of Americans were already thinking, and now the First Lady wants to punish her for saying it aloud. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Crockett's gaze found a juror in the back row who leaned forward attentively. She didn't smile, but her expression said enough. "I'm not backing down." Garvey then called the first witness, Dr. Anthony Ward, a political historian from the University of Texas at Austin. He testified about the long-standing role of elected officials in questioning public figures. Democracy relies on scrutinies, he said. Public criticism isn't just permitted, it's essential. If we penalize representatives for speaking about those in power, we weaken the foundation of our democracy. Ransom rose swiftly for cross-examination. "Dr. Ward, are you implying that public officials can say anything they want, regardless of the damage?" Ward remained composed. "I'm saying that criticism of public figures is vital to democracy. If accountability comes at the expense of silencing dissent, we'll lose something more important than reputation." Crockett leaned toward Garvey and whispered, "That's the line right there." Garvey nodded. The next witness, Angela Marino, a community organizer from Fort Worth, brought emotional weight to the defense. "She's always spoken for us," Marino testified. "She says the things we're too afraid to say. If she can be sued for that, what hope do the rest of us have?" Ransom objected, calling it irrelevant, but the judge allowed the testimony to stand. Finally, it was time for Crockett to testify. The courtroom fell silent as she took the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and faced the questioning. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready. "Congresswoman Crockett," Garvey began, "why did you make the comments that led to this lawsuit?" Crockett's tone was calm but resolute. "Because the American people deserve honesty. When patterns of influence appear, silence isn't an option. Serving in Congress means protecting the people who elected me, not the powerful who expect protection." Garvey paused to let the moment breathe before asking, "Did you intend to harm the First Lady personally?" "No," Crockett replied firmly. "I wanted to bring transparency. If exposing truth is seen as harm, then we need to ask ourselves what values we're really defending. Ransom rose for cross-examination, adjusting his tie. Congresswoman, you understand the power of your words, correct? I do, and you acknowledge that your remarks implied Mrs. Trump engaged in questionable conduct. I acknowledge that I raised legitimate questions, Crockett responded. Questions based on patterns everyone could see. So you had no concrete proof? Crockett leaned forward slightly, her voice steady. Evidence doesn't appear on its own, Mr. Ransom. Sometimes it takes someone willing to ask uncomfortable questions to uncover it. The jurors exchanged glances. Ransom pressed again. So you made harmful statements without evidence. I'm saying I did my duty, Crockett replied without hesitation. And if doing my duty means challenging the powerful, then I accept that. Whispers swept the room before the judge's gavel struck. Order. Crockett sat back, composed and unshaken. This was more than a defense. It was a statement about principle. It wasn't simply Crockett versus Melania. It had become a debate over what kind of speech a democracy is willing to protect.